Now, sit back and let us give an NCTE welcome to James Patterson and Anthony Horowitz.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrea Spooner. I'm an editor at Little Brown Books for Young Readers, and it's my pleasure to be here today with the international best-selling literary superstar rock stars, James Patterson and Anthony Horowitz. These two gentlemen, between them, have written in almost every genre imaginable, whether it's action-adventure, detective stories, horror, magic and fantasy, sci-fi, spy thrillers, and beyond. And today we're going to talk with them a little bit about how they do it and why they're so committed to doing it for all the kids in your classrooms. So I want to start with the...
Before you start, I just want to say one thing. This is not Anthony Horowitz, because he's supposed to be English, and yet he's tall, he's very good looking, and he has great teeth.
I don't know what to say to that, James. I'll say nothing.
Well, we'll start by talking a little bit about how they do what they do. You both write books that are embraced by both avid readers and reluctant readers alike, but we know there are a lot of teachers out there who are so confident at when they can give a kid, a reluctant reader, a Patterson or a Horowitz novel with great confidence that they'll have great results. So I wonder if you can each talk specifically about what you do in your signature writing style that makes your books such great choices for reluctant readers. And why don't you start us off, Anthony?
Gosh, how do I do it? I don't know. I mean, when I write a book, all I can say is this. I know that young people today are busy. They've got lots of things to do. They've got far too much work. They've got their friends. They've got sport. They've got computer games. They've got social networking. And it seems to me the most important thing about a book is that when you write it, a pair of hands should come out of the book and grab the kid by the throat and keep them there. And so you've got to hold on to them for every chapter, but for every paragraph, for every line, for every word. And when I'm writing a book, even if there's a word that's maybe got 5 syllables in it, I'll look at it and I'll say, wait a minute, maybe that word could be shorter, maybe it could have 2 syllables, maybe it could be a little easier, a little bit more accessible, because anything that blocks a kid from reading and from enjoying the story is what it's all about, then they're going to maybe stop, close the book, and go off and do something else. So it's like that with all my writing, really, the pair of hands that comes out and doesn't let go.
Right. Jim, you talked to me a lot about storytelling and how that is a real influence in your voice and technique.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to pretend there's one person sitting across from me, and I'm telling them the story, and I don't want them to get up till I'm finished. So, I mean, I think that's, and for me, it's making sure that you hook people into the story, and then you keep surprising them and keep them interested, and just be aware that there's a real flesh and blood human out there. And I actually, my son has helped me a lot because he doesn't listen to what I have to say, so he's good to practice on.
And Anthony, why is storytelling important to you from a cultural perspective?
Storytelling is everything. Storytelling is who we are, how we got here, how we interact with each other. The whole point about reading is that without reading, you don't understand narrative, and without narrative, you don't understand life. So although I don't make an overclaim for my Alex Rider books, for example, they're nonetheless giving young people from the very start sort of an understanding of the world in which they find themselves, how things connect, how we all got to where we were and are. And I think if you don't read, there's no going forward because you'll never understand quite where you're going or how you got to where you are now.
I think one of the other things about that is, you know, at this point in our culture, and I think this is true in Europe and here and pretty much all over the world, there is nowhere other than books, not in movies, not in television, where you can see so many different points of view, so much diversity, really begin to understand how other people think and what's different about them and what's terrific about them and not so terrific as there is in books. And for example, I recently saw the J. Edgar Clint Eastwood movie, and I really liked a couple of his movies, Gran Torino, whatever, but I don't particularly want the history of our times to be told by Clint Eastwood. you know, between Mandela and J. Edgar and Iwo Jima, and I really would rather that we were getting a lot of that information from books, and a lot of books. And if kids don't learn early on how to read, I mean, they're never going to get that kind of broadness of opinion, and they're not going to do as well in the world for the most part.
Yeah, let's keep talking about books for quote-unquote reluctant readers. This conversation about why Johnny won't read has been going on as long as you two have been writing books for kids, and much longer. Do either of you have any speculation about why this conversation is still going on today? Has it always been this way, it always will be, or do you see an opportunity for the state of affairs to change and evolve?
Well, it's probably always been this way, and it probably always will be this way up to a point. But I do think that, you know, most of us in this room and in general, we can't do anything about the economic crisis, and we can't really solve the healthcare problem. But on an individual basis, in our families and in our classrooms, we can really affect a lot. We can do something there. And one of the points that I try to make as often as I can in print and in public, and I think this is something that you can do whenever you have these parent-teacher meetings, is point out to parents, because they don't really understand this, that it's their job, not your job, it's their job to go out and get books for their kids that are going to turn their kids on. And I wouldn't be afraid to tell them that. You can do it in your own nice way, but it's their job. I have one of my best friends, his wife died when his boys were 6 and 8, and he brought up the boys, and he did a really great job. They're terrific young guys now, both through college, but it never occurred to him that it was his job. He knew he had to teach them how to throw a ball and how to ride a bike and whatever, but it didn't occur to him that it was his job to go out and find books that would turn them on to reading. And I think a lot of parents, it just isn't dawning on them. And I did an article about this, how to get kids reading, that ran in CNN.com. And usually, most editorials here get 500-600 recommends. This thing got like 76,000 recommends. And the reason, I think, is that parents out there are feeling hopeless about this and guilty. So you can get them. The people in this room can convert thousands and thousands of parents to get them to understand that the holidays are coming up. You can't go through the holidays without either taking your kids to the library or giving them a book for the holidays. That's insane that you would think about the video games and all this and not even think about a book. And for you guys to suggest that and suggest that to your kids. Here are 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever books by the two of us. Now,
Okay.
that...
Anthony, what's your perspective on why Johnny won't read?
I totally agree with what James is saying here. I mean, you know, the thing about getting kids to read is you cannot, unfortunately, take a book and whack a kid around the head with it and say, read this, it's going to be good for you, it's good for your career and everything. It doesn't work that way. I mean, I have 2 sons, and even getting them to read as an author myself hasn't always been easy. You know, I can try sellotaping them to their chair and they don't eat till they've read. We have done that. It didn't work. But at the end of the day, what James is saying is absolutely right. You see, the enjoyment of books is something that is symbiotic, something that slides across almost without being noticed. And where it really starts is at home. You know, if you have books in the house, if going out and buying books and going to the library and borrowing books is part of your culture, and if you talk about books, then a kid is going to read. And I always say in England, when I'm talking to parents, you know, one of the greatest things about being a parent are those 20 minutes at the end of a day when you read with your kids, you know? Because I'll tell you something which is absolutely certain. If you read with your kids, you're on the same level as them. You have something to discuss. You have mutual ground. When those kids are older, they're not going to share their computer games with you. They will share books. And therefore, I think that particularly magical moment, tired though we all are at the end of the day, is very, very important. Schools, you as well. In England, we have a real problem, which is that our national curriculum does not leave enough space for reading for pleasure. And again, what I always say to teachers is this: never think of reading as being something which is a leisure pursuit, something which is passive. Reading is about the most creative thing that you can do with your mind. I believe it is equally as creative as writing.
Yeah, that's great.
And this is a little bit of an old school point of view, but I think there's some validity to it. parents don't have second thoughts about you must come to the dinner table and eat. You must get a reasonable amount of sleep. I mean, most parents. And there's no reason why they should feel bashful about saying to some of the kids, you have to read. We're going to help you find books that are going to really be terrific to read, but you have to do it. When my Jack is 13 now, but when he was 8, that summer, we said, you have to read every day. You don't have to mow the lawn, but you do have to read 40 minutes, an hour, whatever. And the first summer, it was, do I have to? But we went out and found 8 or 9 books and by the end of the summer, he had read 6 books that he loved, ranging from Actually, it was. Stormbreaker was one of them. Stormbreaker was one. There was a Percy Jackson. There was A Wrinkle in Time. And 2 things that happened. One is, there are millions of kids in this country and in England, whatever, who have never read one book that they loved, which you can all nod to, you know that. It doesn't have to be that way. And by the end of the summer, Jack had read half a dozen books that he really liked, Stormbreaker being his favorite. And he was he was a much better reader. And when he was 9, the next summer, he read To Kill a Mockingbird. That's how much his reading had improved, because he just read a lot.
So I wish we had more time for compulsory reading in school as well. When I was a boy at school growing up, there was always one period a week or maybe 2, which was just reading. Everybody read, and they had to read, and that's gone out of the English education system now.
There is a program here. Did anybody do Drop Everything and Read? Okay. That program basically, literally, teachers and the students, for whatever the period is, they just drop everything and read, which I love.
Well, I heartily endorse it. Did you think it up? Was that one of your
No.
things?
Yes, I did. No, I didn't.
No, but it just, shared reading, shared text, the whole class reading the same book as well. We used to do that. And it gave us something to talk about. My love of Sherlock Holmes began at school, where we had to read a book, and that was the one that landed on my desk. And if you have to read, then you learn to read. Reading is a muscle. The more you exercise that muscle, the easier it becomes, and the greater the mountains you can climb. You can start with popular fiction, which is the fun, easy stuff. But as you just said with your own son, there's greater books, there's greater classics, all the way up to Dickens and Dostoevsky and all the rest of it, if you just get that muscle started somehow.
Well, then I'm going to ask this question at risk of setting a riot off.
We're trying to screw her up by...
Yeah, mixing it
I'm
up.
cutting you out.
At risk of setting off a riot in an audience of English teachers, I'll ask if either of you think there might be too much emphasis on the importance of the classics in middle school and high school, Jim. I know you have something to say about that.
I wouldn't say there's too much emphasis. I would say that it's good to mix it up. It's good to mix it up, and I think it's as important, and also depends on the student, depends on the level of the class, depends on whether everybody in the class is going to college or there's, so, you guys know that. It really is a mixed bag. But I think it's valuable to mix it up, and I think in particular, the one area, because a lot of times you're restricted in terms of what you can have the kids read, but there's no reason that summer reading lists, there are so many terrific books that are both wonderful to read and important, that really summer reading lists should just be chock full of nothing but those. Kids should come back and go, those 3 books that you asked us to read, or 4 or 2 or whatever it is, were fantastic. And a lot of times it isn't. My son goes to a very nice school, and this summer it was either Huck Finn, which he'd already read, or what the hell is the Civil War? Gone with the Wind. And I'm like, well, Gone with the Wind it's not an important book. Historically it's important, and it's almost 1,000 pages. I don't see that. I just don't get that as an assigned book. So I would just suggest you really look at those summer lists and make sure that they really will turn the kids on to both thinking and reading.
Anthony, I heard you say that you questioned our desire to revisit the classics all the time rather than create new classics of our own. Can you expound upon that? I think it's an interesting comment.
I'm not sure I ever said that. I'm not opposed to anybody reading anything. If a kid wants to read, Dostoevsky in the original Russian, then good for him or her. If they can get away with that, do it. If they want to read you or to read me, they should do that too. I got heckled in New York recently. I had a terrible session in a bookstore where some lady in the crowd was saying that basically all modern books were just sort of underpants and dragons and rockets, and that kids should be reading classics. And I thought that was a completely crazy attitude, because I think we are sort of at the last chance saloon in some ways here. And then what we've got to do, I used to think that it would be better for kids to read classics if they could. And sure, they should be there. They should be aware of them. That's part of the education process. But like I say, I still believe now that we've got to get the kids just reading, enjoying that transformation of digits on the page into worlds which are peopled and which have dialogue and color and movement and all that stuff. That is what reading is all about. Reading is about building. So I'm actually just a proponent of saying just read, let the kids find their level. Let them enjoy what they're reading. Don't put them down because it is Captain Underpants or whatever. Let's hope that they can move on to, there are some wonderful, incidentally, modern classics being written out there by Louis Sachar, by Michael Morpurgo, by Philip Pullman, by so many writers who are doing really, this is the golden age of children's books that we're in at the moment. And kids have never had more choice. But I am very much a proponent of saying let them find their own level.
Well, let's pick up on that point. You mentioned some great authors there. Can you both tell us about some of your favorite contemporary books that you think should be raised to the level of contemporary classics that kids should all grow up on? Do you have a few favorites you might want to mention to the teachers?
Alex Rider, Maximum Rider. A couple that recently, I love The Book Thief. I just think it's, it's a little hard to get into for the first 40 or 50 pages. I think that's a little tricky. But that's one of those books to me that a kid or anybody can read, and you just go, this writer has such a gift for evoking a scene and making characters real and creating an unusual universe. I just think that's a very, very, very special book. And I also, Hugo Cabret is another one. I'm a little, I don't think it quite works, but I think it's brilliant in terms of combining illustration and prose. In fact, that was, I did a younger kid's book, middle school, The Worst Years of My Life, which is comedic, obviously. And the stimulation for it really was Hugo Cabret, because when I went through that book, I just said, it would not be a good thing if all books were illustrated, but this really takes that notion and shows you what the possibilities are for it.
Anthony?
Well, besides Witch and Wizard as an obvious modern classic, I'm not sure I have this impetus to try and chase out modern. I'm going to just put a word in for a couple of books which I love, which are in-between books. I think one of the things that we forget is that it's actually much easier to keep kids reading up to about the age of 13, 14. And after that, actually, they trail off very, very fast. And a couple of books that I have used frequently are with kids, both by American writers, as it happens. Robert Cormier, the late Robert Cormier. I wonder if any of you remember his wonderful books, The Chocolate War, which is a great, great book. And I think on that note, I want to say that in this modern, very fast-moving media age, it doesn't help if a writer dies, passes, because they get forgotten all too quickly, and his books shouldn't be because they're terrific. And another one which I use a lot, particularly with my own kids, getting them from kids' books into adult books, is a book called The Caine Mutiny by Herman Wouk, which actually is the most wonderful, wonderful read. It's a big, fat book. In its own way, it was a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel. It is a modern classic, and it just tells kids you can read an adult book with adult issues, with nothing that is embarrassing or too physical or whatever, but which will really make you think. Have you read it, James? You know it?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, that to me is one of the great, great books, and one I always recommend
and
to
another one,
16.
that Jack read this summer when he was 12 is Unbroken, which he found to be stunning.
Yeah, great. So you are both voracious readers of many, many different types of literature, and so I'd love to hear more about how reading the novels and the writers that you love may or may not have influenced your own writing styles or your own directions at one time or another. And Anthony, I'd love to hear your point of view.
I'll go very quickly through my reading histories. My first book was Tintin, which is, you probably don't know it, but Spielberg's made a movie of it. And I'm writing the sequel, so that's talk about full circle. That's me working on that. But that's what I'm trying to say. You see, I wasn't a bright kid. I was a stupid kid. And I couldn't manage big books full of words. I ended up with picture books. But it still got that motor started. It got me reading. Then I got into, obviously, James Bond because of Ian Fleming was Alex Rider's inspiration. A series of books by Willard Price. Do you still have those in your schools, any of you? Lion Adventure, Whale Adventure, Cannibal Adventure. They got me going as well. From there, obviously, Sherlock. How long do we have? Sherlock Holmes. What is the question as well?
No. That's it. Oh, how they influenced? Did they influence your writing style or your technique of writing? Your favorite authors?
I suppose the main influence on my life, curiously, is Charles Dickens.
Yeah.
I mean, I moved when I was in my 20s into 19th century fiction, and I absolutely love Charles Dickens, Anthony Trollope, Wilkie Collins, Thomas Hardy. What I love about these books is they're actually, at the end of the day, forget the fact that they're great literature, they are. What they also are is great stories. I mean, talk about twists and turns and cliffhanging ends to chapters. I mean, anything that you find in a modern novel is replicated in its own way in these wonderful books. Plus, you get this richness of language, and you get these extraordinarily unforgettable characters. And my favorite, Great Expectations, is my favorite book of my life, a perfect book. Was there ever a greater character than either Miss Havisham, Magwitch, Pip, all of them? They live with me, and I revisit them every 10 years or so, or 20 years, and they tell me exactly where I am in my life. That's what great literature does. It actually marks as a signpost to where you are and where you're going.
And what are some of your favorite books that got you excited about reading?
Well, interestingly, my mother was a teacher for 47 years, and I was a good student, but I wasn't that interested in reading, and I think a lot of it had to do with the books that I was given. I went to Catholic school, and not that that's a bad thing. It was a bad, no. But what we were, and none of us really were big readers, and all of us went off to college, so the influence at that stage wasn't very good. When I was working my way through college, I worked at a mental hospital, and I worked a lot of night shifts, and that's when I started reading like crazy. And it was all serious. I didn't read any popular literature at that point. And that's what turned me on when I started to read it. I'm reading Jean Genet and Ionesco and a lot of a little headier stuff. But that got to me, and that got me really interested in literature. In terms of affecting me, there would be the very tight novels, like, I don't know if you've ever read Mr. Bridge and Mrs. Bridge, Evan Connell Jr. If you haven't, they made very bad movies out of them. They combined them. But it's wonderful, wonderful stuff, and very tight storytelling of the sort that I do, and that really influenced me a lot. Joan Didion, as her first book.
Yeah, I think that the audience here, being English teachers who are also probably teaching kids about writing, are interested in these questions about writing style, and I think they might be interested in hearing the story of how you came into your own distinctive signature style of writing.
Well, as I say, a piece of it was just being influenced by books like that. The other, I was writing a book called The Midnight Club, and I don't usually go back and reread as I'm plugging forward, but for some reason, I was about 150 pages, and I went back and reread what I was planning to really flesh it out. And I read those pages, and I said, I really like these. And I decided my style is generally, it's colloquial. It's the way we tell stories to one another. We don't put in a lot of detail, and I think it would be horrifying if everybody wrote that way, but I think it does speak to people. I mean, when we tell stories, we don't sit there and go on and on and on. I mean, I used to live across the street from Alexander Haig, and if I told the story, I went out to pick up the paper, and Alexander Haig was laying dead in the driveway, and then I went for the next 4 pages about the architecture and the palms waving, and you'd go like, stop already, what happened to Haig, So I've developed more, it's the way we tell stories, most of us anyway. And if you don't tell stories that way, verbally, people probably walk away from you when in the middle of your, or in your classroom, same thing.
One of the common explanations we often hear to explain why kids, it's hard to get them addicted to reading is because they have so much sexier competition from movies and television and video games and all kinds of online entertainment. And I'm interested in hearing you both talk a little bit more about your take on that statement, given that you're both very connected to all these other forms of entertainment. Anthony, you're a screenwriter for both movies and television, and Jim is very involved in getting his books made into movies and television shows. And you're both huge movie fans, going to the cinema several times a week. So do you see other media as a problem or a solution to the reluctant reader quandary? Anthony, do you have anything?
A problem or a solution? Neither.
No.
I mean, they're just another thing to do in the day. Computer games are basically a waste of time. I mean, they're great for parents because they keep your kids quiet. And when I was growing up, I mean, you know, I had two very rowdy kids, and I liked the fact that they were quiet when they played computer games. So we still rationed them though. We didn't let them have too much. 9 hours a day, never more than that. But you know, computer games are sort of are digital. They're your thumb, this thumb and that thumb, doing sparks on the screen. I'm not one of those people who think they're bad for kids. You know, every generation that grows up believes that whatever is around is bad for kids. So my parents thought TV was bad for me, and I now think computer games might be bad for my kids, except I don't. These are diversions. They're nothing more than that. And movies, there are some good movies being made. Not a lot these days, but a few still are good. My son is studying film at UCLA in Los Angeles, so you know he loves movies. But I just go back to the fact that for me, there is never a day when I don't read. Not one day passes where I don't read some sort of fiction, even if it's only for 20 minutes before bed or 20 minutes in the morning or whatever. And I think that you can't see these things as being in competition with each other. They have to sit beside each other, but books, of course, are the best.
Jim, do you have a point of view on that?
Well, I mean, there's nothing we can do. I mean, the world is the world. We can't change what's going on. But once again, in our little universes, in our family, in our classroom, we can affect things. And you know, so much of it. I mean, I think that if in every grade school and high school, if everybody came out and they could read reasonably well and knew some basic math and were learning how to think, this would be quite a wonderful country. And if we can just concentrate on simple things like that. I mean, one of the things is also trying to get kids to use their imaginations. I mean, the typical thing, what are you going to do after school? I don't know. I don't know. What are you going to do this weekend? I don't know. You know, if you just could work with that every day in the classroom, what could you do? You could go play basketball. You could go meet a girlfriend. You could go rob a liquor store. You could become... Yeah, there's just trying to get them into the habit of going past that first step of thinking. And I find that to be a huge problem with a lot of kids, and I'm sure you do too. You know, we just took Jack around to prep schools, and we were talking, you know, in the car along the way, and I kept saying, Jack, try to be specific. Don't. If you think that if your impression of the school was it was great, why do you think that? Lay it out. Why do you think that? Lay it out. Elaborate on it. And he improved, you know, 500% just on the trip, just by getting him in the habit of thinking it through. Thinking it through.
You've actually cited a pretty eye-opening statistic.
See, I pay no attention to the questions. I just go, yeah.
I noticed.
You've cited a pretty eye-opening statistic from California about the importance of reading in a child's future, and I'd love to hear you mention that.
Yeah, this is just such a weird one. I mean, one of the things that does strike me is this whole thing about millions of kids in the country who have never read a book they liked. But in, and I don't know if this is still holding, but in California and Indiana, they were making their estimates about the number of prisons that would be needed in the future based on 3rd and 4th grade reading levels, which tells you a lot about California.
And Anthony, I think you've also said that you
in
believe
Texas
that...
they were doing the death penalty thing. I don't know.
Yeah, right. You believe that books have a part to play in preventing criminality, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the direct work that you've done with literacy projects working with youth offenders.
I do go into institutions and work with young offenders and try and sort of encourage them to read. And it's based on a very simple question a journalist asked me some years ago. There was a very violent murder in England where a 15-year-old basically beat somebody to death for no reason at all. And the question I was asked was, would that teenager have committed that crime if that teenager had read books? And it's an interesting question because it's not quite a direct correlation. Just because you read doesn't mean you're going to be a good person. Dennis Nielsen, the serial killer, was a voracious reader. So it doesn't quite, it's not exactly an A equals B situation here. But the fact of the matter is that books do have a civilizing quality for reasons that I was talking about earlier. That books give you context, they give you color, they give you empathy with other people, which is what you need. These young people grow up in a world without any books at all. They don't have that cushion. They don't have the hinterland. They don't have the softness that it provides in their character. Of course, they don't have other things too. They don't have money. They don't have parental advice. They don't have stable families. But I just think that reading can be part of the glue that can make a young person's life work out. And it horrifies me. We have this problem in Britain too. 20%, that is to say 1 out of 5 kids are leaving school aged 16 and 17 with the reading ability of a 10-year-old. And that means they're only ever going to read tabloid newspapers. They're not going to ever try and read anything at all. And they seem to me to be deprived. There is a deprivation there. And I think that when we talk about books, it's easy enough to talk about boys who don't read, but also it's a social question, it's an ethnic question, and in Britain it's a class question, and it's probably a colour question. It's all these things. And one has to sort of consider that if reading is absent from a person's life, trouble may well follow.
Yeah, there are also a lot of teachers and even school librarians that don't read as much as you would think, which is one of the reasons, primarily because they just don't have the time. I mean, life is hard, And that's one of the reasons that I do have that site, readkidorread.com, because what we've tried to do there is to only put books on there that are going to really turn kids on. They're divided into age groups, roughly, 1 to 6, and then transitional, and then page turners, and then books are more difficult, but really worth the effort. And with little write-ups, not reviews, just little write-ups, so you know that the sense of the books. And once again, just trying to make it easier for parents, for teachers, for librarians to pare down and figure out what books they might want to consider.
Going back to Anthony's point about just giving kids a book and saying, this is really cool and fun to read. Do you as writers specifically sort of consider your audience while you're writing, putting things in there just for them as a little gift to make it cool and make it fun? Whether it be, Jim, I'm thinking of Gas Man, the character of Gas Man named after his poorly functioning digestive system in Maximum Ride, or...
That's one of the few times I've done it. I did give in to the
fart joke humor.
The fart joke humor.
And Anthony, you're
I haven't developed that very much. So.
You're famous for sort of offing the bad guys in particularly outrageous ways, like death by a million jellyfish stings or something. I mean, is that just because it's fun for you to write?
I do love killing a villain in a particularly elaborate and painful way, but that's entirely for me, not for my readers. It just amuses me. I name them after my enemies as well. That gives me even more pleasure. People who've hurt me in life end up in my books. I think. In my books, I'm serving the story. To be honest with you, I don't really think about the readership. But then against that, no one in our position can not really think about the sort of the market and the kids. And I've done things like, the Alex Rider books. A lot of them were set in America, largely because suddenly an American readership was enjoying the books, and I felt I owed it to them. The most recent Alex Rider book has a character in it who loads and loads of kids at sessions came up to me and said, "We love this character, bring him back," that sort of thing. So yeah, I think story is a bigger master than the audience. It's story that I serve, not the readers to a certain extent, although one has to think about the readers too.
Well, you've both put so many interesting points out on the table in this discussion, and it would be great if some of the teachers wanted to ask you some questions. If we have the capability, it looks like we have a roaming microphone in the audience. If anyone wants to raise their hand and ask a question, please do so.
You're there.
There's a lady.
We're
Why
here.
don't you just shout
So
it out?
simple. It's so easy. The question is about summer reading and some titles for high schoolers. When I think you have the leeway of going from things like Book Thief to, literally bestsellers like Unbroken or Moneyball or, So I'm part of it, To Kill a Mockingbird to me is always a book. That's an example to me of a very worthwhile book that's also very readable. I think, you know, in general, think about where the story is very, very strong. I think you can't miss when the story is strong.
Nothing to add, Anthony. You talked about your favorites earlier. So, any other questions? We have a microphone.
How about lady there, just in the front of you? Hey, you got it.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just had a question about, I went from teaching 12th grade to teaching 8th grade, and my kids loved the middle school the middle school book with the mixing of the text and the graphics, and the idea turned into a great conversation about how it's not really a book because it's fun, and we've instituted 45 minutes a day of school-wide reading at our school that was pulled through school boards and, you know, testing scores and people being miserable about it, but the kids love to read, and I don't know where we kill that, but where your book is fun because it mixes the text and the graphics. Do either of you have any plans in the future for maybe going the graphic novel route, or again, another book kind of to follow up the middle school?
Well, the Alex Rider books are are coming out one after another as graphic novels, and they're beautifully produced, they're beautifully drawn and written by a very good writer who adapts the books. I'm not personally going to do any books like that. I liked it too, by the way. I thought it was great fun. But I'm not myself interested in doing books with drawings in. Why? I don't know why. I like words. I'm a words man. But I take your point about how good they are and how useful they are. James.
Yeah, I love that genre, and I think it really is useful. To me, there's a very simple-minded thing, which is the more kids read, the better they get at it, period. And they will just become better readers. It'll be more fun for them. They'll be more likely to read more books. They'll be able to read better books. And it's just like movies. If we started with Ingmar Bergman in the schools, we'd all go, I really don't like movies that much. Mm-hmm. So you have to work up to things to some extent. I'm going to do a lot more illustrated. The next middle school is written, and all the illustrations are done. In middle school, his sister is named Georgia. I'm actually doing a book about Georgia, where Georgia contradicts everything that Rafe said in the other book. It starts out, the first chapter, my brother is a big fat liar. Here's what he says I look like. Here's what he drew. Here's what I really look like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have another book, which is illustrated, which we're just doing the illustrations for. It's about a kid who his dream, and he studies everything, is to be a stand-up comedian. So he's learning everything. He knows every joke in the history of mankind. So it's a very funny book, but like middle school, there's something really serious about his story.
So lots to look forward to. There are other questions. Yes.
Hi. I wanted to let you know that the Alex Rider series is like one of my go-to boy books series. And we really appreciate that. My kids appreciate it. And the Maximum Ride series, I have like serious addicts for that. But I have like
one
a really...
One of your go-to flying kids.
Yeah. But I have a seriously selfish adult question. And I was just wondering if James Patterson could answer who the author is for the Nikki Heat series, if you had any insight to that.
Not me. This is a Castle. I've been on Castle a couple of times, which I'd like to do it more, but it takes like 3 days before you're done, go out there. I don't know. I don't know who wrote it. It isn't me, though.
Yes, another question?
I just wanted to say, James, I often do the same with boy books whenever they are looking for a book and they're not readers. I always refer them to your books because of the pace and the short chapters, and it seems like it gives them small goals, and they seem to really, really love your books.
They're good just before you go to bed, too.
I'm sorry?
They're good just before you go to bed, too. One more.
Right. Yes, exactly. They can't put it down, and they'll tell me that, which is great that they have that sort of emotional reaction, that their heart's racing and they want to get to the next page. My question is to some of the budding authors that I have in class, what would I tell them in terms of, what your schedule is like as a writer? Do you just write during moments of inspiration? Do you have to set a schedule for yourself?
I think you're lucky in life if you find something that you like to do, and then it's a miracle if somebody will pay you to do it. So I love to tell stories. It sort of came to me by accident. When I was growing up, everybody thought I'd be a doctor or a lawyer, and I just started writing stories, and that's what I wanted to do. I think, with kids, I think there are two things: read, write. I mean, it's so simple, and it'll if you don't want to write every day, it may not be the right thing for you to do. But just write a lot, and you keep getting better at it. Well, I didn't, but most people do.
Anthony, what about your writing schedule and process?
I can only repeat what James just said. I mean, I love writing, and again, I'm blessed by the fact that I'm paid to do it, and it's the only thing I can do. I'm no good at anything else, so it's just as well, really. I tend to write pretty much all the time. To kids, I would agree again with what he just said. If you want to be a writer, you read. The more you read, the better you write. Write, the more you write, the better you write. Go out and have fun. That's very important to kids. Go out and have fun, have adventures. Do something illegal. Don't get caught. You've got to have something to write about. And finally, the most important thing, believe in yourself. Believe in what you're writing. Believe in yourself all the time. There'll be doubters and there'll be people who say it's no good around you, but just believe in yourself and you can't go wrong.
As kids get older, and if they really show a lot of promise, I think the other thing you begin to steer them toward, a lot of times when they start, they're going to mimic styles that they've come across to try to get them to develop their own voice. All right, I always, you'll see reviews and they'll go, oh, this guy writes like Dashiell Hammett, or this person writes like, and you go like, what are they, plagiarists? Where's your style? And I think that's a useful thing to at least get kids aware of. What's your style? What's your voice?
Other questions?
Yes, you mentioned about you didn't want, Clint Eastwood telling all of the realistic historical things that are going on. Are you going to think about doing some of the retelling of some historical moments that are important for in a child base so children can get that fiction and nonfiction reality as far as a Clint Eastwood slant on it?
Nonfiction, historical stuff. Have you
So,
thought about doing any
Is the
of that?
question?
What is the question?
Nonfiction,
Is the
historical
question being-
things for kids.
I guess my question is, would you consider doing some of those aspects?
Yes.
Historical fiction.
James was telling earlier about Clint Eastwood's take on history and not being right. In Britain, we face the American movies that keep coming in about how we didn't really take part in the war. We were sort of just quiet onlookers, and we sort of. But it's not what I do well. I'm not into that area. I've written one historical novel, The Devil and His Boy, set in Elizabethan England, and I love writing it. And I'm writing a historical movie at the moment, but. I stick to what I'm good at, and what I'm actually interested in for myself is I'm very interested in the kids relating to the world in which they find themselves. What you're saying is very, very important too. I don't think I'd be good at it, so I don't do it.
I wrote one novel which I enjoyed, Jester, which deals with the Crusades, and I've thought about it. I might do something of that sort. Maybe with American history, maybe.
Yeah, on Monday he'll call me with an idea, I can promise you.
I do, I do. If I was just thinking about it on the plane, ironically.
Another question?
Scary.
So I just want to say also that lady, I have spent 10 years.
Andrea, by the way, is also my editor, and Stephanie Meyer's editor, and blah, blah. I'm sorry.
I have spent 10 years writing Foyle's War, so that's sort of a big slab of history, 1940 to 45, that I've dealt with at length.
Yeah. So maybe you'll both get inspired by that to do some more.
I think this will be the last question.
Okay.
I just wondered about your thoughts. So many of us teachers, I've been guilty of this, and in elementary school, ask students to keep a reading log and summarize after they read and prove that they've read. And I have so many students, I teach 8th grade language arts, and they'll come and they'll say, do we have to write after we read? And so I want to know what your thoughts are about that practice.
I don't know. What is a reading log? We didn't have that back in the Middle Ages. What is it exactly?
It's where you write a report on book.
You read a book report, Ben?
It's just you keep a schedule, students keep a schedule of what they've read. I read this many pages.
Oh, yeah.
This is a summary of what I read. Here's my parent's signature to prove it.
Look, I mean, everybody's got to do what they got to do. I am big on let's ask a nice essay question about the book, so that you really can get a sense for whether the students, what their reaction to the book was. You know, and obviously whether they read it or not should come out, but how do they think? How did it affect them? You know, that to me is very valuable. You know, multiple choice questions and what was the characters' names and how. You know, I don't know. I personally don't think that's as important.
I'm with that. I mean, I don't write a certain number of words a day. I don't do reports on how much I've done or how many adverbs I've used today. So I think that again, you've got to do what you've got to do, and by and large, the teachers I know do a fantastic job of getting the kids into. It's not all negative. There's a lot of positive things happening in British schools anyway. For me, I would say that writing about a book and talking about a book and enjoying the story and the characters and the color and the excitement and the chases and the surprises is much, much more important than merely saying, hey, today I did 6 pages.
And of course, I wouldn't be the one reading the essay answers.
Yeah, you want to do that too.
Well, maybe that's a good place to wrap it up here now that it's time. Yeah, go ahead. Let's
Thank all of you.
Make sure that you take your bag with books by Anthony Horowitz and James Patterson home with you. We are also having a signing very shortly in the northeast section of the exhibit ballroom. I think that starts in about 15 minutes, so we'd love to see you there. And I guess we've come to the end of our time. So thank you all for coming, and really thank you, James Patterson and Anthony Horowitz, for taking the time. It's been great conversation.
Thank you, Jim and Anthony, for being here. Thank you, Little Brown, for making it possible. And especially thank you, Jim and Anthony, for your wonderful books that make our jobs as English teachers so much easier to inspire readers in our classroom. Have a wonderful rest of the conference, and thank you for joining us for the secondary section luncheon.